Okay, and some of the questions are more legal oriented, so I can just tell you from my perspective as an advocate. From my perspective, it appears to me that the Federal Americans with Disabilities Act Title II would say that the city has a responsibility for keeping the sidewalks accessible and cleared. So we're responsible for that. But if you have 500 miles of sidewalks, how is that possible in order to keep that cleared?
Now, there's a couple of photos. You can take a look on the screen over here if you folks want to. I mean, there were some photos, and maybe if we can loop through those again in the control room and just take a look. So here's an example here, and it was Mariah that actually took some of these shots, and I really appreciate you doing that and emailing them over, so we could kind of get a general feel for what some of the challenges could be and are for folks that are in wheelchairs. So how do we deal with this? Is this basically a matter of the city or the homeowner? And maybe we should go back to Vicki, if that's okay, Alderman Danberg, just for a minute.
I'm happy
and let's talk about that, because that's a great example.
Yes, I'm happy to speak to some of these things, and I'll try and lay out as many of the issues as quickly as I can. We've got two snow clearing problems. We've got getting the snows off the streets, and we do a great job of that. Nobody ever complains. And we've got getting the snow off of the sidewalks. What happened here in that last photograph was that in the middle of the night, let's say, when the snow was coming down and a plow needed to clear four corners, instead of going around the corner, it cleared up onto the sidewalk in four directions. So in a cold winter, that blockage is going to be there until March. And what happens is that people who let's say are on wheelchairs or even with guide dogs wind up getting trapped into the corners because the guide dogs, for example, they are trained not to take their people out into the street, and so they will climb them over the snowbank that it can sometimes be 6 feet high. And a wheelchair doesn't even sometimes have turning radius. So that's the issue of trapping people. There are people for whom it's a luxury to walk, and there are other people who are citizens of our community who have no other alternative but to walk on the sidewalks. They have to do that in order to be able to get to the pharmacy to buy their basics. They have to go out onto the sidewalks in the wintertime as well as in the summer. There are other questions, like, for example, how do you handle the private contractors? Right now, just some facts. We have 312 linear miles of sidewalk. We clear 67 of streets, we cleared 67 linear miles of sidewalk. Those sidewalks are mostly on school routes and near the villages. 50% of our 312 miles of roads is cleared by city and 50% by private contractors. We have 3 major private contractors. We have 6 snow districts, so each contractor kind of takes 2 districts. It's a little different than that, but that's basically what it is. And they are followed by a chaser. A chaser is the mama with the whip who goes around and checks on whether things were done right and then gives a snow report. And there is a report that then goes to the city on all of the snow clearance.
You need to include the private contractors of residents as well.
The third piece, thank you very much.
Just wanted to remind you because that was a huge issue.
This is probably the biggest problem, are the private contractors of residences. Now, on streets around where I live, for example, you can walk around, and in any neighborhood, you can see sidewalks that haven't been cleared, but driveways that are cleared down to black asphalt, and the walks up to the front door are cleaned down to bare concrete. Now, the question is, why wasn't the sidewalk cleared? Because some people feel that they have a responsibility to do it and others just don't.
You mean homeowners, residents?
Homeowners, residents,
Okay.
yes, we're talking about residents.
Okay.
Businesses are required to clear the width of their sidewalk, or as best as they can, depending on how much snow there is.
Well, so this is a perfect entree, though, into what it seems like is really the core question. This has been an ongoing topic for
A decade, more than a decade. At this
yeah, it
point.
looks like at least a couple
Yeah.
decades. There was a snow ordinance for a year. It was repealed for some reason. Doesn't necessarily automatically mean it's a bad idea by any stretch. It could be a good idea that was not implemented correctly. I mean, there are a number of ways to look at this. I would also just add, because we haven't mentioned the League of Women Voters, which is a highly reputable organization, believes that this is, in fact, a very, very high priority for them. And that in itself, I think, does tend to drive some of the discussion.
It does. And the League of Women Voters and other groups are doing quite a bit of very helpful research for us on the committee. Other things that we have to deal with, for example, what happens if you don't have a sidewalk? If you just have a lawn, do you clear it or do you not clear it? What if you clear, what about the legalities? If you slip on a sidewalk, if you clear it and somebody slips on it, who's are you legally liable for injury, or
Well,
are you not?
That's a great question, because right now, my understanding is that there's a state law currently as of the day that we're taping this, which is February 1st, and this program will run for the month. By the end of the month, it could change for that matter. But right now, my understanding is that a state law is currently in place where snow is considered an act of God, which is a pretty easy argument to make, I think. And if you don't shovel, you can't be sued because you're not tampering with an act of God. If you do shovel, but you shovel poorly, it means that you have created a circumstance that potentially could have contributed to an accident, and therefore, in other words, there seems to be sort of
almost, but not quite.
Okay,
There-
how is it different than
In
that?
1883, this law was enacted,
We're not going to have that much time, are we?
and the law is going to be under judicial review by the SJC, the Supreme Judicial
So that's the way it is right
Court,
this minute, though,
on
right?
the 8th of February.
Okay.
And they're going to live stream it into the city of Newton. I know the law department is going to be looking at it, and they've invited all of us if we want to come in and watch the proceedings. But as Charlie laid out, this is significant because I think that the case may have been Target store, where they cleared their parking lot. Someone slipped on ice and broke their hip and sued the store. They lost, and the reason that they lost was that it was determined that because although they had cleared and changed the snow, the ice was an underlying factor that was naturally occurring, and that they had not in fact placed the ice there. The ice got there from
An act of
melting
God.
snow.
All right, so rather than,
So-
I
So
get the point,
at
we'll take a
issue-
look and we'll see.
Yeah, at issue is
Yeah.
whether or not people are going to be frightened forever from clearing their sidewalks.
Well, and there also
by
becomes,
this-
you know,
by-
what the
by this
society that we're
decision.
in, litigious society and all of that, and, where do you get the greater good and all the rest of that. But what John was saying before we started taping, just briefly, we were chatting a little bit, as we all were, and what one of the things that's an offshoot of what Vicki is talking about is enforcement. Let's say, just for discussion's sake, that an ordinance of some type was put in place. Then we get into enforcement. You would hope that people would do the right thing, whether there's an ordinance or not. But let's say that there is an ordinance. What are some of the issues regarding enforcement that we would need to figure out how to deal with to make it an effective ordinance?
All right, before I respond to that, let me just very, very quickly comment and congratulate Greer and Vicki on creation of the Snow Committee. In all of my experience in the Board of Aldermen, the whole subject of snow never comes up until December or January or February. And by April, everybody forgets it until the following December, January, or February. So I would hope that your committee would stay in existence throughout the spring and summer, and that hopefully you can get something really done between the seasons, so to speak. But in response to your comment, Charlie, about the enforceability, there are a lot of problems. There are a host of problems, starting with the basic question as to who in city government does it. Is it the police responsibility? Will policemen have to be sent out to tag or to ticket homeowners who don't shovel their sidewalks or don't? Very few people shovel anymore. Most people use a snowblower, but you know, will the police do it? Will inspectional services do it? Will the Public Works Department, these chases, be responsible for literally looking at every single sidewalk?